Hello, everybody. I'm Felix Wemheuer, and this is my YouTube channel, Studying Maoist China. Today, we have a distinguished guest, this Professor Susanne Weigelin-Schwiedrzik. Hello, Susanne.
Hello, Felix.
And she has been here before, so I recommend you to watch the old video on party history, because today we want to talk about the new master narrative of party history under Xi Jinping. So Susanne also served as the Vice Dean of Heidelberg and Vienna University, and she is well known for her work on historiography and party history in China. Just to mention again, already in '84, she published her dissertation on party history, and then you can also find many of her articles in journals such as China Quarterly. So last year, the Communist Party of China, the CCP, celebrated the 100th anniversary of its founding. For the first time since '81, the CCP passed a new resolution on party history. The document that was issued in December of last year is called Resolution of the Central Committee of the CCP on the major achievements and historical experience of the party over the past century. We will talk about the question how the resolution is related to establish Xi Jinping as a leader of party and state for his third term. The 20th Party Congress of the CCP might be held in the end of this year, 2022. If she's elected again, he could rule China up to 2027 or even longer. The resolution is also very important because it establishes a new official master narrative, how history should be written in textbooks or cultural production. So here's my first question. In the resolution regarding party history of '81, the leadership had to come into terms with the Cultural Revolution as a major disaster for the party and the people. As the title of the new revolution suggests, it's focused more on the great achievements. The text confirms the official resolutions on party history from '45 and '81 and says that they are still correct and useful. The part of the new document regarding the era before Xi Jinping became the leader is actually quite short. Did the leadership re-evaluate the Mao and the Deng era, or are major arguments still in line with the master narrative of '81?
Well, thank you very much for this interesting question and for giving me the possibility to talk to you about this very interesting new party resolution. I think the title of the new party resolution already tells us that something is different from the past, because as you pointed out, this time the title includes the word achievements, whereas in the past, in 1945 and in 1981, in both cases, the title was about questions. And as you know, the word "wenti" in Chinese includes questions and problems. So both resolutions back in 1945 and in 1981 were actually resolutions in which the new leadership distanced itself from the immediate past. And they criticized the errors of the past. And it was by criticizing the errors of the past that the new leader actually established himself as the rightful leader of the Communist Party of China. So in this case, it's very interesting that they're using a different kind of wording. And it's also interesting to say that the criticism of mistakes in the past doesn't play a very important role in the resolution. Especially when we look at what was extremely important in the 1981 resolution, which is criticizing the leftist errors of the past. The word leftist error doesn't even appear in this 2021 resolution. And the idea that somebody as a person had committed a mistake, which was actually an idea that was propagated in the 1945 as well as in the 1981 resolution, does also not appear. There are mistakes somewhere flowing around in the party, but they don't say, you know, this person committed a mistake or that person committed a mistake. And I think this is actually a very, very interesting new trend in writing history. If you want me to talk about certain key issues, I would suggest that we talk about the Great Leap Forward, about the Cultural Revolution, and about the Tiananmen movement in 1989. Well, with regard to the Great Leap Forward, as a matter of fact, the 2021 resolution is pretty much in tune with the 1981 resolution. As the 1981 resolution, it does not mention the Great Famine, and instead talks of the 3 difficult years, which we know is sort of a way of circumventing the issue of the Great Famine. With regard to the Cultural Revolution, I think it also is pretty much in tune with the 1981 resolution. However, by using the word 彻底否定, which which can be translated into totally negating the Cultural Revolution, this is a wording that we don't find in the 1981 resolution, but which has ever since been the object of intensive discussion in China, because the victims, especially the prominent victims of the Cultural Revolution, have always demanded the party to actually come up with this overall assessment that the Cultural Revolution needs to be totally negated. And for that reason, it's very interesting to see that in the 2021 resolution, we do have this wording of 彻底否定, totally negating. Of course, the 1981 resolution didn't have a statement about what happened on Tiananmen Square in 1989. I think here again, it's quite interesting to see that the resolution is quite careful in its choice of wording. It says it is 严重政治风波, which implies that it was a severe political disturbance that occurred under conditions when internationally and inside China, the Communist Party of China and its regime felt that it was being challenged from all different sides, and that many people were raising criticism. So they actually put this international factor quite prominently, as if the whole movement would not have occurred if not, this overall and the Cold War movement had gone through the world. But it's also interesting to see that it uses the word 动乱, which we usually translate into turmoil, but it doesn't say 反动. It doesn't say that it was a reactionary movement, which of course was a wording that was chosen at the time to criticize and condemn the movement. So this time they're actually not using this. And I think this is also the result of a long-term discussion that has been going on in China, even though outsiders don't see a lot of this, but people who know a little bit about the inside, they do know that this discussion has been going on for a long time.
I think they even said 反革命动乱, right? Counter-revolutionary turmoil in 89, right?
Yes,
yeah.
The assessment in 89 was that is 反革命, and the people who participated said, we are 爱国主义者, we are patriots, so you cannot condemn us as counter-revolutionary. And this time, this is very interesting that they do not repeat the assessment they took in the year 1989, although, of course, they say that it was totally right to suppress the movement, and that the suppression of the movement was the victory of the party and the people.
Yeah, so the second question regarding the revolution of 45 and 81, you have argued that if we read this document between the lines, we could understand that these narratives were compromises between various factions inside the party leadership. For example, the narrative of 81 was the lowest common denominator of the faction which wanted to deny Mao's campaigns after 56, and a more conservative faction. Is the new resolution a coherent master narrative of Xi Jinping, or do you see concessions to various political forces?
I think that this document is a compromised document, as all the other documents were before. I think that it is very interesting to compare the book-length version of 100 Years of Party History that appeared in spring of 2021. Earlier, before the 100th anniversary festivities actually took place. And if we compare this book-length version, which to my mind is comparatively consistent With the resolution, we see that something major has happened in between spring and the time when the sixth party plenum finally took place in November. And I think that what we can see is that different forces inside the party were trying to put or make their voice heard in the resolution, so that it is not a resolution that is totally focused on Xi Jinping, although of course his name appears more than 20 times in the resolution, but it's not totally focused on Xi Jinping. We see very often that the party is actually mentioned, that the party as a collective or the leadership as a collective is mentioned more often than Xi Jinping as a person with his specific contribution. And I think it is quite interesting to see that in the book length version, everything is sort of focused on Xi Jinping in the sense that all the people before him, all his predecessors, somehow contributed to the achievements of the party by way of doing the right thing in their specific times, which implies that, for example, Deng Xiaoping issued the policy of reform and opening. In his time, this was totally correct. But now we are in a Xin Shidai. We are in a new era. And for that reason, Xi Jinping has to do things differently, not because he wants to criticize Deng Xiaoping, but because he has to solve new problems, has to confront new challenges. And I think this historicization of the predecessors is a very, very important way of avoiding to criticize them. So what do we see in the resolution? Of course, we also see sort of elements of this kind of, attempt to historicize the predecessors of Xi Jinping. But interestingly, I think we have to see that the fact that Xi Jinping is trying to avoid criticizing his predecessors has not led to his competitors not criticizing or at least challenging his view. So as a matter of fact, the new resolution is a compendium of all different kinds of views that we can find inside the party at this moment, and why Xi Jinping was not strong enough to exclude these alternative views from being introduced to the resolution. His competitors were strong enough to force him into accepting that their views were integrated into the resolution.
Can you give an example for this?
Oh, yes, of course. I think, a very crucial issue is, as a matter of fact, when we look at the 13 points which are being raised in the party resolution, I think we can look at those 13 points in terms of giving us a very, very clear indication as to which problems are being contested inside the party, and on which issues does the party leadership actually have a united opinion. And we see in the 13 points, and maybe later on we can go in more detail about this, that economic questions are being highly contested, whereas questions of military defense, question of national security are questions where the leadership seems to be quite united.
Yeah, this was my third question about this 13 points. I read them as a quite open identification of problems of development of party, state and society under Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, to argue that Xi Jinping sets the CCP back on the right track. And this part is related to fields of policy such as cultural production, military state security, or even environmental protection. These are all topics that had not been included in official resolutions on party's history in the past. So how is the resolution related to the effort to establish Xi as a leader for his third term?
Yeah. Well, from my point of view, I would totally agree to your assessment that all these 13 points include hidden criticism not of persons. It doesn't name any person that is responsible for these mistakes, but the party is always overall responsible for these mistakes. And they include, like, for example, especially in the field of ideology, in the field of party building, which is, of course, an important issue in a party resolution. They say, you know, that the party has been too weak, that ideological work has actually come down to zero, and that implicitly, you know, under Xi Jinping, we actually did lots of things to overcome these weaknesses and these errors. And I think these 13 points, as a matter of fact, show us very clearly, as I just said, you know, in which fields do we have a positive assessment of Xi Jinping's policies, in which field is a positive assessment of Xi Jinping contested. So if we go into the field of economy, we'll see very interestingly that 2 out of the 13 points are dedicated to economy. The first one is on economic build-up or economic construction. And it very much includes most of the issues that we would usually relate with Xi Jinping's current policies. So especially more coordination, more intrusion of the state into the economy, less market, also to a certain degree, more concern about the well-being of the people. But then when we switch to the second one, we find very interestingly that this second point is focused on making us understand that Deng Xiaoping's policies of reform and opening are still valid. So it is a whole paragraph, a whole subchapter, one point among the 13 that tells us, you know, how important it is to still put economy into a command position, to give the economic development a priority, which of course is one of the major ideas that Deng Xiaoping propagated. Secondly, they say, you know, we have to develop the market, we have to develop the economy, and so on and so forth. So here you actually have 2 paragraphs which to a certain degree contradict each other. And when we look at the quite interesting development since the 6th plenary session, where we see articles that actually contradict each other, appearing in the People's Daily, if not on one day, so at least, you know, on one day and the next day. So we see that there is lots of tension in the field of economy. However, in the field of ideology, in the field of cultural work, in the field of 国家安全, national security, and defense and military issues, I think we see how Xi Jinping is put up very much up front. He is the one who has actually come up with the major ideas. It is also in this subchapters that we find the names of leading military personnel being mentioned, and their punishment for you know, committing major mistakes in terms of corruption and things like this. So here we see Xi Jinping as the overall leader, whereas in other fields, especially in the economy, we see him contested. So some commentators are saying, you know, very, very interesting development. Maybe, you know, if the economy doesn't get better until the 20th Party Congress, maybe there is quite some resistance in the party to re-elect Xi Jinping. But under these circumstances, we maybe could give him another chance. And as you might have read in the resolution, they tell us that the National Security Council was actually initiated and founded because Xi Jinping had made this proposition. So maybe we will see Xi Jinping as the leader of this National Security Council, whereas somebody else will take over the leadership of the party.
Yeah, we will see. We're looking forward for the 20-party Congress, and it's quite an irony that it's the 20th Party's Congress, yes, because we know that was very important for the Communist Party of the Soviet Union when Khrushchev started the de-Stalinization. So my last question, some Western and Chinese observers are afraid of a new cultural revolution in China and consider the development in recent years as a return to Maoism. The new resolution denies the Cultural Revolution, as you have said. Furthermore, the idea of class struggle under socialism is upset. According to the resolution, the principal contradiction, in the past it was called major contradiction, of the Chinese society is that between unbalanced and inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life. She is obviously not a Maoist in the sense of the Cultural Revolution. What does the resolution say about his goals for the future?
Well, I think the resolution is very, very clear about his goals and the goals of the Communist Party and the goals of the current leadership of the Communist Party. And this goal is to position China in the world as at least one of the global leading countries, maybe the only one, not in the near future, but in the further future. And I think this is the idea that actually unites Xi Jinping with the party and the party with Xi Jinping. So what they actually want to tell us by this resolution is that China is not heading for a second Cultural Revolution. China is not going to be poor again as it was under Maoist times, but China is going to be a country that claims a central position in the world. And in this sense, I think he is not Maoist at all. Right? Why do people speak of, the possibility of yet another Cultural Revolution taking place in China? I think they're using the word Cultural Revolution only as a metaphor for a situation of enormous uncertainty, and also a situation where the party or the party leader was able to mobilize the people to suppress the people. And so they are afraid of a situation like this, especially as we all know, in recent times, the party leadership and the security forces in China actually sort of punished a number of prominent people who, according to my understanding of the situation, had only been doing what they think was totally okay in China, until they suddenly realized, oh, it's maybe not, right? And that was the minute when they were taken into custody, right? So this uncertainty for the leadership people that, today you are totally fine, nobody has to criticize anything, and the next day you're suddenly in jail. It's this kind of uncertainty that people remember from the Cultural Revolution and from Maoist times. And I think this is only sort of a metaphor on the one hand side. And of course, there are people, especially outside China, who sort of use this fear of this uncertainty to frame it so that people become even more fearful. Okay, this is yet another Cultural Revolution. I personally think that Xi Jinping is trying to do lots of things, but he's definitely not mobilizing the masses in a political movement similar to the Cultural Revolution, because he knows that today, more than ever, if you mobilize these people, they won't be controllable anymore, because there are so many things that normal people in China could be unhappy about. So I think that this is more a game of words than actually a political assessment. However, I also think that somehow people are relating to the Cultural Revolution because they feel that the party is actually in a situation where different voices are not only existent and people somehow speculate that they are there, but that the situation is such that the voicing of different opinions from inside the party cannot be suppressed anymore. And this is, of course, also a situation that we know existed before the Cultural Revolution, and existed, of course, during certain phases during the Cultural Revolution. And this is also like a déjà vu thing, that people say, oh my gosh, if now in the party leadership, Ramin Rabao today can say this and tomorrow can say that, this is something that should usually not happen. And if the leader, Xi Jinping, were as prominent and as powerful as some people in China make us believe, but also some people outside China make us believe, then this should not happen. So what I think is, that the crucial question at this moment is, as a matter of fact, the question of how does the economy get back on track? Because much in contrast to what many newspapers outside China report to us, the situation is quite precarious. And the situation, especially in October and November of last year, is going into a totally wrong direction. And I'm not saying that the sort of policies that Xi Jinping implemented during the summer of last year are actually the reason for why the economy runs low in China. I'm not saying this, but what I can say is that the people who contest Xi Jinping's leadership inside the party are using these economic problems to make him look really bad and to make him accountable for this economic problems that they are facing. And these economic problems, as we all know, very easily develop into social problems, social unrest, and even more than that in China. So from my personal point of view, the fact that we have these contesting ideas about economy in the party resolution, and the fact that we have a unity in terms of national security and defense policies shows us that the fate of Xi Jinping is going to be decided on whether or not he will win the struggle with the people who contest his economic policies. And it's very interesting to see that, Xi Jinping came up in the summer of last year with the idea of everybody gets rich at the same time, 共同富裕. Well, this wording actually pops up in the resolution several times. However, it does not pop up in the 经济政策, in the economic policy sections. So it's more a question of ideology, or maybe it's a question of social harmony, or maybe it's a question of culture. It's something like this. But 共同富裕 is not a policy, and it's definitely not an economic policy. Very interestingly, when you look at the yearly report of the economic development that was discussed on the 8th of December last year, you see a very interesting wording there. It says, the cake has to be big enough for it to be divided, right? So it's very interesting that this is the sort of the wording that is directed against the 共同富裕. 共同富裕 means, we establish a welfare state, but they say, no. Our cake has to grow before we can eventually start making a welfare state, which implies that, people will have more from the cake than they have at this moment. And I think this is actually one of the key issues we are being confronted with here. And I think that whether or not Xi Jinping is going to be re-elected on the 20th Party Congress will be decided on these, during the struggle over economic policies.
Yeah.
Whereas, the idea of national security is something, as we said before, where the party leadership is quite united. And this sort of gives them also a way how to get rid of Xi Jinping without risking that there is too much turmoil and an unpeaceful change of leadership inside the party. And last but not least, I think, to sum up, if we look at this party resolution, we see how the party is very lively in its discussions and internal struggles at this moment. And the question, what is going to happen before the 20th Party Congress has not been decided by the party resolution of 2021. And from my personal point of view, I would suggest that, at this particular moment, we still don't know what's going to happen, but I think we can be very sure that there will be lots of internal discussions and struggles inside the party before the 20th Party Congress is going to take place. Eventually, nobody knows whether it's going to take place in time.
Yeah, it's very interesting. A commentary on the website of the Renmin Ribao also said we will not kill the rich to help the poor. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are many voices in the party, and we can learn that a close reading of party documents is always important to understand China. So thank you a lot for this interview, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.